Today we are joined by Bill Adair, who is a Knight Professor of Public Policy at the Stanford School at Duke University. He is the creator of Politifact. He is also the founder of the International Fact-Checking Network. And he joins us now from Raleigh, North Carolina. Thank you, Mr. Adair, for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Willie. So I am a journalist. I still do a lot of work as a journalist in different ways, even while I work as a faculty member at Duke. I still help with Politifact and with Politifact's North Carolina operation, where we fact-check politicians in North Carolina. And I am the co-editor of a publication called the 9th Street Journal, which covers Durham, North Carolina, and also politics. And so I've been...
Do you believe that lack of structure of community journalism, community-oriented journalism, and the consolidation of major news sources around print media are affecting trust in journalism?
Yes, very much. And I think there are a number of reasons for the decline in trust in journalism, but that's a big one. I think the fact that most newspapers in America now are owned by big chains is a large part of the reason for the decline in trust, because people don't identify with their local newspaper. Even their local television station is probably owned by a chain. And so it's a big corporation rather than a local owner. And I think that was a big part of the trust problem. I think other parts have to do with unfair allegations that have been made about bias and people's misunderstanding about bias. And I think that has played into the partisan political wars, and that has had an effect on trust. And political gerrymandering, where we've put politicians in safe political districts, but that are very extreme in terms of the politics of the residents in them. That's played a role. So you have districts that are either very conservative or very liberal. That has played a role. So you put all these things together, and it means that people just don't trust the media anymore. I heard some results from a new survey that the Knight Foundation did, and there are a growing number of people, not just that don't trust the media, but who believe that reporters intentionally want to mislead the public. And I'm chuckling because I think that's so preposterous. And yet that's the kind of situation that we're in, because there's been this decline in trust, and it's very scary. And we need to change the trust situation, but we also, I think it's got to go hand in hand with diffusing this tense partisan atmosphere that we have, because I think those things are very much interrelated.
Yeah, so I'd actually like to stick on that, which is, as we're talking about media bias, and there's this push from, I don't want to say the right or the left, but from kind of just everybody who's trying to play this selective moment of, if I agree with it, it's obviously good journalism. If I disagree with it, it's a smear by the media who are working for the other side. There's been this kind of a push. At NBC, you have Chuck Todd, who at times, I think, tries to play towards the center because of that bias. How is it that in such a politically charged situation that the media can deal with that context? And how do you as a journalist believe that there's, I wish that I had a better way of saying this, but the way that politicians will try and weaponize news stories and the way that people weaponize news stories rather than taking it at face value as honest reporting?
Well, I think there's a lot to unpack in what you just said and asked. If you're trying to cover the news objectively these days, it's really a no-win situation. So somebody like Chuck, who I think is a great journalist, can't win because in any given show he's going to offend everybody, and it's a thankless task to try to hold people accountable and try to provide some insights on what they're doing if you're trying to do it from the middle. It's a lot easier to just shoot from one side. So it's a great time to be at Fox. It's a great time to be at MSNBC and just, go from one point of view. It's a very difficult time to be a fact checker because fact checkers are objective and they're coming at this with a neutral point of view, assessing the facts and telling people about a claim that a politician made, and they can't win because it's like being a referee in a Duke UNC basketball game. You're going to make one team mad with any call you make. So it's a really difficult situation. It's just so bitter. And, after the election, and I presume you're by the time people hear this interview, we'll be past the election. Hopefully we'll be in a time where we can reflect and try to heal this partisan divide, because this partisan divide is not a good thing, doesn't matter what side you're on. I remember covering Washington when the parties got along, when the parties worked together on policy, when they found common ground to do policy. And I think that's now unthinkable in Washington. That's unthinkable in many state capitals. So we've got to get past that.
So you said that it's a really hard time to be a fact checker. And you've kind of expressed before, particularly on CUNY TV, which for those who don't know is the City University of New York TV, which is a PBS station in the city of New York, that fact checking is the ability to hold politicians accountable, particularly for statements, and that it's easy because not easy, but that it's effective because most politicians have this fear of being politifacted. They don't want to be caught in a misstatement or a falsehood or an outright lie. Accountable. How do you hold someone in the age of that weaponized fact checking or that less accountable subject for fact checking? How do you navigate that?
Well, I think you do the same thing you've always done, which is you have to bring the same methodology to every fact check, no matter who says it, and be even-handed about it. So it doesn't matter whether it's, Donald Trump or Donald Trump Jr. or someone we've never heard of. So I think the challenge for fact checkers in Trump is that there was just such volume that you could put the entire staff checking what he said and not have time to do anything else. But I think the larger thing is to make sure that you look at the claims that he's making that are spreading and and make sure you check the politicians who are repeating those claims or making similar claims, and assess them too.
Maybe I should have asked this at the beginning, and I think it's definitely an important question for people who aren't entirely familiar with the distinctions within the media. But a lot of people who watch, read, and listen to news are prone to wonder why exactly a site like Politifact or an association like the International Fact-Checking Network exists. Maybe you could explain for our
Sure.
viewers tonight the difference between verifying journalistic articles and really being a direct political fact checker.
And of course there has long been a practice in journalism where journalists check the accuracy of claims in their articles, and part of the editorial process that's called fact checking. You go through what you've written and you check each sentence and make sure it's accurate. That's called fact checking. But there is also this genre of journalism that is checking claims by politicians, and we have come to call that fact checking. And that is a relatively new phenomenon that started in the 90s, in the early 90s, and has become now a very distinct and important form of accountability journalism.
Okay, well, Mr. Adair, I think that's all I had for you today, and I appreciate your time, and I am so grateful that you were able to join us.
Great.
So,
well, thanks so much for having me, Orly.